Hello and welcome to Europa Universalis 4. I am Lord Forwind, here with a country guide for Poland as part of my continuing country guides series. So, Poland, surprisingly one of the countries that actually exists today, but in 1444 it is in a very precarious position. Poland is probably one of the It's a large nation, but in terms of actual success, it's one of the harder nations in Europe to play, mainly because it's surrounded on all sides by enemies. To the south, you have the Ottomans and Hungary. To the west, obviously, you have the HRE. To the north, you have the Teutonic Order, who you'll probably want to kill immediately. But then you have all the Baltic states, Sweden and Denmark, if they break loose. And to the east, you have the rising power of Muscovy, Russia. So Poland in 1444 starts off in a very unique situation. They're in the interregnum period of the Polish government. Their king and Hungary's king has just been killed by the Ottomans, which means for the first X amount of years, it's usually not years, usually months, you are going to be without a monarch. However, at some point, you'll get an option of forming a personal union with the Grand Duke Casimir Jagiellon as ruler over both Poland and Lithuania. It's important to note that if you take this union as Poland, you are the senior leader in the union, which is a bit odd considering you're taking Lithuania's ruler. Ways to guarantee this event to definitely fire it. You want an alliance followed by a royal marriage. You do start off with the historical friend modifier, which will help with your relations with Lithuania. Other countries you may want to consider allying yourself to, there is Austria, which is usually a good target. Hungary sometimes usually is your rival, that I found. Other ones that can be quite good, Brandenburg up here is not a bad ally either. Mainly because it prevents Brandenburg from trying to expand into the Teutonic Order states if you're allied to them. They usually tend to dominate their region or get destroyed. Obviously, Austria is a very powerful nation in its own right, has a very good chance of getting a union over Hungary. So if all things go well with Poland, Lithuania, you could technically have an alliance network that encompasses this whole region here. Poland also starts off with two vassals, Mazova to the north and Moldova to the south. Mazova is a vassal that you'll want to annex quickly, whereas Moldova is in fact Orthodox and a March, which means it's not so easy. You cannot just simply annex them. You do have to revoke their March status first, which will cost you stability, and then of course you have to wait a number of years to integrate them. I've usually found it's just worth keeping them around. They prove to be a fairly nice buffer to the south against the Ottomans. Because of their March status, their forts do have a slightly better fort defense, so it does slow down any Ottoman expansions. Plus, if the Ottomans expand, the odds are they'll be wiped out, thereby solving you of a diplo slot problem anyway. You definitely want to annex Mazova as soon as possible because there's a nice little event, which apparently is not here yet. Essentially, once you annex, or maybe I think it's an event, not a mission. Eventually, once you annex them, you'll get an event that will allow you to move your capital from Krakow here in the south up to Warsaw, and it will also give some increased development to Warsaw, but it more importantly will give it a permanent negative 10% development cost in that region for the rest of the game, which means you can build up Warsaw, seeing as it's a farmland, to a very good development fairly quickly. And I think it actually includes the rest of the Mazovan lands up here as well. In terms of expansion, Poland should definitely try and kill the Teutonic Order first. In fact, usually once you get your union over Lithuania, you'll get an event that's like Reclaim Western Prussia or Remind the Knights of Our Duty. It's important you don't take an event like to get access to the sea through Stolp. Because it's important to realize Stolp is part of the HRE, which means Austria and all their allies will come to defend them. And despite Lithuania having one of the better armies at the beginning of the game, there's almost no chance that they can save you. Sorry, just ticking forward today so we can actually see Lithuania's army. They'll bring 21,000 troops to any war, which means, oddly enough, they start out stronger than you. They proved to be a fairly good union. In fact, in some ways, once you turn them into the Commonwealth, assuming you do, because you have an event, form Poland-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which will essentially annex Lithuania, or integrate it, inherit, you'll actually go down in strength because they're actually very prosperous in terms of their lands. You do want to take the mission that allows you to attack the Knights, because up here this Prussian land is very good land, and in fact the Teutons are somewhere a little bit below you in development, but one of the larger nations in Europe that you can wipe out pretty much without anyone caring. They will usually ally themselves 99% of the time with the Livonian Order, which makes sense, being both monastic orders and Catholic in the region. Things to watch out for is if the Teutons ally themselves to Denmark. That is actually a fairly strong alliance between Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Livonians, and the Teutons. It's possible to win that war and wipe out the Teutons, but again, it proves to be difficult. You also do have to watch your aggressive expansion, because you have a lot of HRE nations nearby, and of course you're Catholic. So there is that slight issue with aggressive expansion. But usually you can take about half of their lands in one war. If you're going to take lands, you definitely want to try and get Danzig and Tuchel over here, because that will prevent Pomerania or Brandenburg, if they've killed Pomerania, to expand into the Teuton lands, which is the last thing you want, because if they take Danzig and Königsberg late game, they can form Prussia, and you'd prefer if Prussia never existed whatsoever, ever, as Poland-Lithuania. Once you conquer them, you definitely around that time will annex Moldova. Other things to look out for: if it's possible, you either want to get an alliance with Muscovy, or you may want to kill them even before you go after the Teutonic Order. I had a very successful game once where Lithuania had a claim, I think it was on Odiev or something, and I used that. I took the land, took it as Poland, not as my union partner Lithuania, and that gave me a border with Muscovy, and I swiftly pounced on them and wiped them out. It took a long time because Muscovy is huge, but if you can do that, it gives you control of the entire Russia region. If not, just taking the Teutonic Order and building up internally in Poland-Lithuania will make you one of the larger countries in Europe. The sad fact is you can neither fight the Ottomans nor Muscovy in the long run, and even fighting the Baltic states will be difficult. That comes because of several reasons. First off, Poland starts off in a feudal monarchy, but you will get an event that will form them into essentially an elective monarchy. And if I remember correctly, they are the only elective monarchy really in the game, which is slightly interesting. But it essentially means you have a government form that involves the Seljuk. I think I'm saying that right. Essentially, it's every single noble in Poland gets voting rights to decide who's the new king and what they're doing, which means mostly what will happen is all the nations around Europe will start improving their preferred candidates' chances in your lands, and if they win, their dynasty will temporarily take over your union. You won't lose the union, but there is a chance that you can inherit or vassal or union other countries throughout Europe. Usually, from what I've seen, and I'm pretty sure this is game rule, that they cannot get a personal union over you, which would be very disastrous as Poland-Lithuania. But on the other downside, the Seljuk start to pass reforms, sort of, more like limitations on the monarch's power. Essentially, they limit your force, how many troops you can raise, what's the reinforcement cost. Eventually, they'll do tech, idea cost, and it can be absolutely crippling. Usually, we'll fire around the time of your third ruler, or if your ruler switches to a different dynasty. That's what I found. Not entirely sure if that's game code or not. But it does lead to Poland pretty much being internally crippled. You'll have penalties to stability, tech, manpower regeneration, reinforcement cost, I think. Definitely manpower. And overall, it makes Poland significantly weaker than you would think. It's part of the reason why Poland-Lithuania is so easily destroyed, either by Muscovy or the Ottomans, despite being one of the largest nations in Europe. However, you can stop these reforms, some of them. There's always an option to refuse the Seljoum's policies, usually at the cost of a large amount of stability, but you can ignore a good percent of the penalties they give you. However, if you do take all their reforms/restraints on the monarch's power, if you go on long enough, there will be events that will eventually break them, usually around 1600 or so, which means you've got a very slow early game. But essentially it will switch you to a despotic monarchy if you succeed in a giant civil war, and it will give you some bonus absolutism. It used to make you an absolute monarchy, which was great, but considering absolute monarchies don't exist, in the most recent expansion, it's not as helpful. In terms of Poland's ideas, Poland has a very strong idea group late game. Early game, it's terrible. That's like really bad. You've got cheaper cavalry and max promoted cultures. Yeah, so what? It's really not helpful. Cavalry cost is relatively nice because if I do remember, you do get the... where is it? You are Eastern, I believe. So I believe it does give you slightly more cavalry. I can double check that right over here. Cavalry to infantry ratio. No, you're not. You're not considered Eastern. So you only have the normal cavalry to infantry ratio, but it does mean getting cavalry in your armies is slightly cheaper, 2.5 gold. The next Polish idea is 10% production efficiency, which is nice. It will give you a little bit more income. As Poland and Lithuania, you never really have to worry about being poor, but you're never going to be rich, if that makes sense. You should be able to support your full army and everything, but not be able to afford like level 2 or 3 advisors, even if you take over the Teutonic Order. Your next idea gives you a monthly war exhaustion negative, which helps, so you get less war exhaustion, which will help in considering Poland and Lithuania can easily be attacked from multiple sides at once. Plus you get a little bit cheaper stability cost, which is not that useful. Honestly, the best part is the war exhaustion. Your next one, you start to actually get to some of the better Polish ideas. You get some bonus manpower, but more importantly, you get infantry combat ability, which is pretty rare in the world. Not many nations get infantry combat bonuses. Then the next one is the core Polish Commonwealth idea, which is cavalry combat ability plus 33%. This will give you the strongest cavalry combat ability of anyone in the game from the get-go. It's really strong. Plus it will increase your cavalry to infantry ratio, allowing you to have more cavalry in your armies, which, considering how strong they are, it's worth it. Next idea, cheaper regiment costs, kind of nice. It kind of stacks with the cavalry cost to give you overall cheaper cavalry. But then you start to get to the good ones. Plus 5 discipline is really strong, but plus 15% morale is huge. Not many nations get morale bonuses. This clearly shows that Poland and Lithuania is designed to be a mid to late game nation, because they're not going to get any of these ideas till around 1550-ish, depending on how good your monarchs are and how lucky you are. You will fall behind in institutions pretty quickly. You'll get the Renaissance, but when colonialism fires, it's going to take forever to get to you. In fact, in terms of Renaissance, you will get it, but I recommend if you've annexed Moldova, you try and pop it and develop it in Warsaw on your own. Of course, it will always fire in Italy, but it's pretty easy. You'll get a ticking score towards it, but usually using some internal monarch developments will get it to you at a reasonable pace. It's pretty weird because the way it actually spreads through Europe, the institution usually right here is the last area outside of like Russia and the Nordic states to get it. It will spread through like Pomerania, the Teutonic Orders, and then come inland. Problem being, of course, the Teutonic Orders are pretty much always your rival, and make it a lot difficult for the institution to spread through their lands. In terms of idea groups as Poland and Lithuania, it's a bit of a question mark about what you actually want to take. As always, I advocate defensive ideas because of the morale, army tradition, and just general improvements to defensiveness, considering you're going to be largely crippled on the military front. I mean, you're not crippled. You can still fight and win wars, but you're worse off on average than the average nation, if that makes sense. The penalties do hurt you a bit, but you can recover or ignore a lot of them. Some people will argue you want to take aristocratic ideas, which is not bad early on because it will give you more cavalry combat ability in the long run. Plus the cheaper cavalry costs will stack nicely. Military tech cost will help with some of the Polish problems. Yearly absolutism and autonomy is kind of nice. The bonus manpower will stack nicely with your manpower idea. Noble officers, the army and navy tradition decay. Not huge, but nice. Additional diplomat and leaders can be handy because you're going to be fielding a large army and have lots of people around you who pretty well hate you. Mercenaries is pretty much useless, but the siege and the loyalty from nobles is rather nice. Later on, you do want to probably get quality ideas because the infantry combat ability plus the cavalry combat ability is really strong. There's actually an achievement if you're playing in Iron Man mode called Winged Hussars, where I believe you have to have over 50% cavalry combat ability. You start with 33 if you have both aristocratic for 10 and quality for another 10. I believe that pushes you above what you need. There is, in fact, if you take espionage ideas, if you look down here, the Noble Loyalty Act. So if you take espionage ideas, you can boost cavalry combat ability by another 20%. Now, I know I'm making a big deal about the cavalry combat ability, and it's really good. You just have to remember cavalry becomes less and less relevant as time goes on. Little bit less of a problem for Poland and Lithuania, seeing as they have such huge bonuses towards their cavalry. Other things to consider taking. Humanist ideas is not really that bad on Poland. You don't have any. Your final idea for the Polish ideas is tolerance of heretics, which, considering you're Catholic, has a bit of its own problems. It will allow you to vaguely tolerate Orthodox lands, but not completely. If you take humanist ideas, not only will it give you the decreased unrest and religious unity, but it will make it so you can completely tolerate Orthodoxy and Coptic in your lands, which is really strong considering Lithuania starts off with more than, I'd say, 3/4 of their lands, rule of thumb, as Orthodox as compared to Catholic. This means Lithuania is actually a lot weaker than they appear to be. They will get a lot of unrest issues, which means if you're at war for a long period of time, you as Poland will stay stable, but Lithuania, the war exhaustion will pretty much cause rebellions from every single minority culture group in their area, which is about 3 of them, but you'll also then have religious rebels on top of that. Which means one of the things you have to do as Poland overlords of Lithuania, if you choose to go that path. Of course you can't, but you can choose to just be Poland, but it immensely weakens you. You have to deal with a lot of Lithuanian rebels, and Lithuania, sadly, is not the best at suppressing them, I have found. They tend to just run out of money, manpower, and everything. Their land isn't really that good if you look at it. Your Polish land is half decent. It's a lot of grasslands and farmlands, which means you can improve it pretty easily. In terms of other ideas to take, so if we've considered both humanist, aristocratic, quality, and humanist. Another good one to take is economic, because it will increase your development ability. And overall, economic is just rather necessary to large empires in general. If you're trying to conquer Muscovy and the whole rest of the Russian region, administrative ideas is going to be huge for the decreased core creation cost. Just saves you a lot of admin power, lets you fully integrate that area. You really don't need to focus any of the maritime ideas. They're not that useful. Influence ideas is not particularly handy except for the aggressive expansion impact, seeing as you already have one vassal and you're not really going to get any other ones. There's not really nations you can vassalize other than a couple of the Russians because of the HRE problem. At some point you could try to break into the HRE, either through military or, my personal favorite, wait till they hit the wars of religion and hope that like Brandenburg, Bohemia, Saxony all convert to Protestantism or Reformed. And if you're friendly with them, they're going to hate Austria. But if you're friendly with them, there's a really good shot you can get elected Emperor of the HRE. And that is a game changer as Poland-Lithuania. If you do manage to do that, pretty much instantly make sure your capital and other lands are moved into the empire. Obviously, don't move them all in because you'll be losing your imperial authority in the long run. But if you can become Emperor of the HRE as Poland-Lithuania, you can usually hold it, assuming the Catholics win the HRE Wars of Religion. It's really powerful because as Poland-Lithuania, you're definitely the largest nation in the HRE, even if Austria takes out like Bohemia or Austria-Hungary. And that allows you then to expand into the HRE freer. It allows you to get vassals. It's really strong. So you've got a couple options. You can expand into Muscovy, Russia. You can try and find your way into the HRE. But I do recommend early on you kill the Teutons and then move on to kill off the Livonians. And then try and like kill off the Crimea and stuff. I don't recommend fighting the Ottomans for quite some time. In fact, if you can avoid fighting the Ottomans the whole game if they're doing well, that's kind of good. The Ottomans are very strong if they take over the Mamluks, and they can easily beat you and a lot of your allies. They have a very strong early game. They fall off late game, which is ironically when Poland-Lithuania gets stronger. So really don't fight them till you get like your cavalry, infantry, and your discipline modifiers. Then at that point you probably have a stronger per unit army. They're probably going to have a much larger army. Once you are able to beat the Ottomans, all of this area is yours for the taking because no one else will really be able to do it. This is another reason for an alliance with Austria because they will easily help you beat the Ottomans. Plus Austria, Hungary, Poland, Lithuania alliance can easily stop an Ottoman invasion of Europe, which is quite likely to happen. If the Ottomans do attack, I found the best strategy overall is to strengthen this fort here and put another fort like right here. Between those two forts, this area right here is a choke point for the Ottomans. You can easily run circles around them as they try and siege different forts. If they try and siege this fort, you can attack them because they'll probably be sieging this fort, but they can't simply march from here to here. No, they have to march down here and then up again, which means you can easily consolidate your forces, take out one besieging army, usually before the Ottomans manage to reinforce it with their other troops. That's just a strategy if the Ottomans invade. I figured I'd throw it in there because it's really useful. Another thing to do is once you've conquered the Teutons is relocate your trade node. You do control the Krakow trade node and you control 50% of it, but usually the Baltic Sea trade node is more valuable because Novgorod's trade will be steered to it, which means all of this trade here goes through this trade node and there's no way for you to steer itself to your lands. Plus, if you steer land up here from Ragusa, you can't get it to Krakow either. But from the Crimea, you can steer a lot of trade north. And overall, if you take out Riga, the Teutons, and the Livonians, this turns into you have a lot of the trade power in that region. Overall, it's just more valuable, and as Poland-Lithuania, you're always obviously looking for more sources of income. Usually Danzig's the best one to make your trade center, I guess. What's it technically called? Trading port. Especially if you give it to the burghers because of the estuary and the center of trade. It will dominate the trade node for you. Other idea groups. I know I'm kind of jumping around, but there's a lot behind Poland-Lithuania that makes them honestly one of the more interesting nations to play. I won't say one of my favorite nations just because of how hard it is to really survive the Seljuk policies. At that point, trade ideas is pretty good if you've done the Baltic trade node. Diplomatic ideas can also be fairly nice. Espionage ideas, if you really want to double or triple up on that cavalry combat ability, it's really powerful. Plus, if you take quality ideas, you can get even more yearly army tradition decay, which is quite nice. And you don't want any of the exploration colonizing ideas. You're never going to colonize. Your colonization range is already, this much less than Castile, Portugal's, England's, and France's, which means by the time you get there, they've already started really colonizing everywhere. If you don't want to play humanist, religious ideas is going to be a necessity for the stability cost and the general just conversion of all Orthodox lands. Now that I think about it, a good strategy might actually be to take religious ideas and help Lithuania convert their Orthodox provinces, which would stabilize them a bit. I guess that's doable. Innovative ideas can be somewhat useful. The monthly war exhaustion combined with your war exhaustion is really strong. Plus the tech institution costs are always nice. That's pretty much all the ideas. Late game, obviously, you want to take offensive for the siege and force limit. But quantity is not necessarily a necessity as Poland, Lithuania. You do get a huge bonus to your manpower, and your army size manpower pool is not bad. Obviously, you can take it. It's actually very viable on them, considering just from their ideas alone, they have some pretty strong military ideas, which means taking, quality and defensive is not as required for them. But if you want to take it anyway, because it stacks on top, makes it stronger. Let's see, any other interesting things about Poland, Lithuania? I will point out the fact that you do have a couple Orthodox provinces at the beginning of the game yourself, and they are rebellious and will continue to be until you convert them, which means that should be one of your earliest priorities. If you can get a Inquisitor advisor, that will help on that front a lot. But your big priority early on is to kill the Teutons, get the union with Lithuania. I recommend waiting till you attack the Teutons to get the union with Lithuania, just because I'm not sure if you can get the union if you're at war with them as an ally. I think you can, but having a union with them makes that war a lot easier. Once you've beat up the Teutons and the Livonians a little bit, then the choice is, do you want to go after Russia or do you want to go after the Crimea and just internally develop? If you're going to take on Russia, that will be your biggest path to expansion early on. If not, you'll have to wait for mid to late game to either go after the HRE or the Ottomans. I do not recommend invading the Baltic states just because of their land really isn't worth it, which means Sweden or Denmark can be pretty good allies for you as Poland. I'm pretty sure that's all the major stuff to deal with as Poland, Lithuania. The Elective Monarchy is really a difficult thing to juggle with. You can use prestige to boost your heirs, which on average tend to have better stats than foreign heirs. On the other hand, you have to keep losing prestige to stabilize that, which in fact means like innovative or influence ideas which give you the prestige will help in terms of maintaining heirs. Luckily, unlike the rest of the countries in Europe, you'll never have to worry about an heir. You will always have an heir. It makes you pretty much equivalent to the Ottomans and their harem Ottoman government form. I think that's it. You've got a really nice start as Poland, Lithuania for about 50 years, and then you really fall off, and then you have to wait about 100 years before you rise to power again. Obviously, there are exceptions, and if you play it well, you get a really strong late game power spike. But it's not the easiest nation to play, and I don't recommend it for beginners, but for a moderate intermediate player, it's a good nation to play. The key is the union with Lithuania and killing the Teutonic Knights Order area. So that will be it for this guide video. If you have any questions or you've got any clarification on what I said or you want clarification, please leave those below in the comments, and subscribe if you like this and other types of Europa guide video game videos, and check out all my other guides. I've done it for most of the major countries in Europe. In fact, Poland, Lithuania, I think might be the last of my major nations in Europe videos. So thank you guys all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it and it will help you with Poland, and I hope to see you again. Bye for now.